Today is day 4 of the November 87 7-day retreat. I had a feeling yesterday that the topic of work had just been touched upon, it had not been dealt with exhaustively, which no topic ever can be. But since several questions have come up about it which are significant, we will continue with it, at least at the beginning of the talk, and see how far we go with it. Because we will also talk about the self in whatever time remains, and then tomorrow if needs be. One thing we didn't mention yesterday when we were asking why do we work, is that usually, particularly in our Western civilization, or in any progress-oriented civilization, success-oriented civilization, we work in order to become somebody. For our own sake, to satisfy our own image of ourselves, being successful, being somebody. Of course, there are the parents whose expectations have been registered, maybe since day 1 or earlier of our life. What our parents have expected of this child of theirs to do for them. I may not put it that way, but that expectation is there in most parents. Whether that child will fulfill expectations of theirs, maybe expectations that they have never been able to fulfill for themselves. Will the child do that? And a great amount of effort put into that, to help the child become somebody. Climb the ladder of success. In school, in college, and then on the job, in business, industry, in the military, in politics, or in the church, spiritual organization. Almost everything we do together, there is position in it and prestige of certain position. In addition to the function that is there to keep whatever the enterprise is going. There's function to a job, but there can also be prestige and status to it, and then it becomes desirable to have that job. Not just for the work that's involved in it, which one may or may not like, but for the prestige and status, and usually the money that goes with greater prestige and greater status. is more money. We often judge people by the amount of money they make and impress on ourselves. We are held in awe. Somebody making a lot of money. Like with everything we want and crave for or strive for, there's never enough. Whatever we attain does not take care of the craving. The craving is, as it were, independent of what it attains. It continues. To be more for more people. One may arrive at the top of a country, be the President of the United States, and then what kind of library is going to be built? They've grown. I've read an article on it. Each new president has a larger library complex. With 4 living presidents, that's a tremendous amount of money and effort put into commemorating. And I wonder whether there's there also competitiveness. Whose is going to be the largest? And what will it be after that? So can one ask oneself as one works or thinks of changing jobs or getting a job, whether that element is there, that aspect? Not deny it or condemn it, then we don't see it. If it is there, what if there was no prestige to it, or if one saw through the emptiness of that? Can one see through the emptiness of it? Will one still enjoy the work? Or is it so closely linked that the work becomes meaningless if the prestige factor, the status factor disappear? All this has to do with self-image, which we will closer examine when we talk about self. And how to observe, to watch, and to question within oneself how linked one's wanting that is with what one feels is expected of one by one's parents, relatives, friends, teachers. The dependency on other people's expectations to make good. Make something out of oneself. That admonition is writ everywhere, inside and outside. Make something of yourself. What does that mean? Tremendous pressure on us. We feel wherever it first originated, it's there, it's in the air. And what does it mean? Make something out of your life. What is one's life? A constant striving, battling, struggling, competing. And the alienation and isolation that comes from that. It can be in the household. It can be with a husband or wife, competing. Among the children, in the neighborhood. who has the bigger house and so forth, working hard to remain on top. One feels one has to. These are irrational drives implanted in us. And we nourish them ourselves by the pleasure that we gain, the brief moments of pleasure when one moves into a bigger, better house and neighborhood. But the unending effort to keep that up, for the sake of what? What is one's life? Is it something separate? Is one the owner of one's life, the maker of one's life? All of this has to be questioned, the way we talk about ourselves. What is living? Somebody brought up, with reference to what was said yesterday, you're talking about giving minute care to one's daily work, not slurring over it, just being there, caringly. What if you're a nurse on the floor, too few nurses, and an immense amount of work? Not being able to really cope with all the work there is, being called here and there and up and down, left and right. And seeing one cannot give the care, there's no time. Tremendous pressure to do everything right and then some more. No time to give the care that one feels one needs to give to the job, to the patient. And the person proceeded to also relate how tense it is often among the colleagues and the bitching that goes on, the frustration. This person said, not just on the floor among the nurses, she just go all the way up and down, all the way to the top. Pressure and griping. And not enough time for caring, for the care that is needed to do a good job. The person probably wondered about this yesterday when it was described to feel a faucet handle. Who has time to feel a faucet handle if there are 3 or 4 patients who need to be attended to? The bells have rung, the light is on. But in talking about it, we agreed that even though one may be on the rush the whole day, 8 hours, it doesn't mean there's not alertness. There cannot be alertness and attention given to everything, including the rushing, including this map that the computer brain may throw up of who one still has to see, what has to be done. As a sort of a printout happens when one has lots to do, in which everything appears, what still hasn't been done. Every once in a while that has to be called up and looked at, what's next. That doesn't mean one has to have it in the mind all the time while one is turning over one patient. To be attentive does not necessarily mean to be slow, to have to do everything very slowly. It's marvelous when there's the time and the luxury to slow down and not brush the floor in a hurry. But brushing the floor quickly does not mean it is therefore inattentive. Attention has nothing to do with speed, has nothing to do with time. It's either there or it isn't there. It doesn't go away because one moves faster. It goes away when the mind is caught up in pressure, a feeling of anger over it, feeling of resentment, feeling of inferiority, that one can't do it all, that one isn't good enough, or ambition to do it all, to be the best on the floor, and so forth. Then there's no attention, and there's a sticky thought system at work. Sticky meaning no one is caught in it, like a fly on the flypaper. We also talked some more about this, being caught up in the bitching, the backbiting that goes on often at work when there is a lot of pressure, tension from supervisors or whatever, or from the condition itself, understaffed, overworked. And this person mentioned how quickly one is drawn into it. Getting some relief from that. It's meager, but there's some pleasure in it, some relief pleasure. But it has its toll, cost. So often now, we feel related to each other when we have a common thing to complain about, to gripe about. We may not be feeling relationship, but this is our common cause now. Gives us something to agree about it. With which I'm not saying to accept, like what used to be said in Zen centers, bow and serve. To be aware what's wrong, what's false. Too few nurses to do the job. That's what is lacking there. And does one have to be drawn into this, what is also called negativity, the anger, the resentment, the griping? One can question it. One doesn't say this is natural and I don't want to be an outsider to it. I'm one of the group. But one can be one of the group without that. Not paint a rosy picture of something that is not rosy. We're not talking about that. Bringing out the positive also. But not being caught up in anger and resentment, but seeing the facts for what they are. And either doing something about it, or if it's impossible, then not just venting at immovable facts by anger and resentment. It just backfires all over the place. It eats one out from the inside. Somebody else said that. It's really not the amount of work. One may work over hours all day long and get some rest at night and feel fresh the next morning. But resentment, one does not wake up fresh. It's right there again. And it may have continued in one's sleep and dreams. It's toxic. Another interesting thing that was brought up in that conversation was, person said, I would like to work fewer days. I could afford it. Husband makes some money. I wouldn't have to work 5 days with all the overtime. I could work 4 days. And on questioning, why don't you? This person said, well, then the other nurses would have to do my work too. And I don't want to put that on them. I understand what that would mean. This is thinking holistically. Not just of my life, my comfort, or my whatever. It's looking at the whole situation, which happens when we're alert and aware and not just enclosed in our own cocoon. One sees the total situation. And one's actions then may come out of what is demanded by the total situation, the whole thing, not just my. And this is not a renunciation of self or trying to be selfless. It can become that. One can get that extra pleasure out of it, how selfless I am. But it can come out of the intelligence that comes from seeing the whole. Realizing I would still rather work the 4 days, but one sees the consequences and one does not want to bring those about. Because one understands them when one is in that situation of already too much work. One can see it, one can feel one's way into one person fewer on the floor. And that's a good question to ask of ourselves when we are caught up in resentment or anger or frustration. Is one seeing holistically or very, very narrowly just what happens to oneself? Although that is not to be ignored or denied. But it fits always into a larger whole of human beings like ourselves. Something else was brought up in a different meeting. What if you do take some leisurely time during the day or night, I don't know what it was, and your spouse makes you feel that you're doing something that he or she is not doing, makes you feel bad, makes you feel guilty about that. Maybe the spouse or maybe somebody else on the job. One feels very honestly and genuinely that one needs some time off, some leisure time. And yet the wife or the husband or somebody else on the job who's also working very hard doesn't have that time off. Doesn't have time for that. And then makes one feel guilty. Blames one, maybe, or may not. Words may not be said. We have other ways of communicating. Indirectly, when we don't want to talk directly, there are looks and gestures and indirect remarks. What about that situation? occurs all the time in our life in one form or another. Constant struggle and conflict, wanting to do something, and yet feeling I shouldn't, or somebody else making one feel you shouldn't be doing that. How we usually end up, we either go ahead and do take our time but feel guilty. And that's not leisure time, it's guilty time. We feel the pressure, there's no ending of it. And there may be this other struggle going on, well, you too take, one may be arguing back and forth over it. You too take time off, and when I work, and so forth. No relationship, just going ahead with something, but yet not free. Or one may help that other person, or do busy work so as not to be made feel guilty, but feel bad that one doesn't take one's leisure time. How can that be resolved? Can that be resolved? It's not so different from what we talked about before. First of all, can one look and listen and think holistically? Not just from the enclave, the enclosure, the cocoon of my needs and interests and feelings, while not ignoring them, not denying them, not calling them names, selfish or whatever. Being in touch with that, and yet is one seeing the whole situation in which one finds oneself. Not just from one's own vantage point, but the whole situation, being that, climbing into that, climbing into the shoes of the spouse, the skin as it were. Thinking, how did he or she spend their day? Not from my point of view, but the mind, we can do that. It's possible to feel oneself into how somebody else feels. It's possible when this enclosure breaks open. When the mind isn't stuck on the flypaper of me only. We have in all, particularly in this Western civilization, but one shouldn't overemphasize it because it has gone back and forth, the scientific mind, which is factual, has achieved enormous things. Because there is a way of being factual, not self-centered, to just look at the facts and work with the facts and find out the lawfulness of facts. So that capability is there in the human mind to be factual. Then when facts are seen, then we talked about it before, a new intelligence may come into being which makes clear the action to be taken. So, coming back to our case, looking at the whole situation, including one's own fatigue, overworkedness, need for some free time, one may indeed take that free time Take the walk. And not feel guilty? Is that possible? Because one has looked at the whole thing. Take that walk and refresh, be refreshed, renewed, because there was no guilt feeling in it. Or one may drop the idea of taking a walk, taking some time out, and help out. And has one really dropped the walk so that there's no resentment piling up? One is now doing that because this has been seen to be the thing to do. Then no back and forth. The sun is coming out and I really should have taken that walk. It would have been good for me. Can one catch those thoughts which are agitators? Thoughts are agitators. Can be. See that and not fall for it, not enter in on it, be done with it and do this other thing. And when there is no back and forth and the mind isn't pulled back and forth, then maybe the helping, the spouse or the co-worker or so can have a quality of leisure in it. Being free from resentment and anger, and therefore seeing what's in one's hands, underfoot, and right before one's eyes. And being in relationship with another human being. With whom one is not competing at that moment or indirectly sparring. Then one may find that there is a genuine kindliness welling up, a lovingness, which has nothing sentimental about it. And noticing the difference between a relationship that is nurtured by kindliness and one that is sustained by itching and griping and resenting. We're not painting ideal pictures. I hope you don't hear it that way. Or setting up goals. We're just questioning and looking and wondering. Whether it's possible or not, each one of us has to find out for themselves if we're interested in how we're living and relating to each other. A lot has been said, and it doesn't feel right to start a new topic. So we'll end here for today.